What would you do if you discovered that your family history held a secret so dark that generations of your family had chosen to bury it in oblivion? In a quiet corner of the Arkhangelsk region, among the dense northern forests, stands an abandoned estate whose walls hold a story that locals only whisper. The dilapidated mansion of the Sokolov family, once prosperous industrialists of the 19th century, hides behind its majestic facade a secret so perverse that it could shock even the most resilient imagination. Immerse yourself in this story with me as we unravel the tangle of terrifying events that took place behind these silent walls. Events that local authorities have tried to erase from the collective memory for decades. Spring of 2022. A young researcher, Irina Vorontsova, arrived in the village of Kamenko to collect material for her dissertation on the history of merchant dynasties in northern Russia. Kamenko is a small settlement where time seems to have stood still. Gray wooden houses, muddy dirt roads, and an all-pervading silence broken only by the rare voices of the few residents. Irina rented a room in the home of an elderly woman, Maria Petrovna, whose dilapidated house was only a kilometer from the abandoned Sokolov estate. The first thing that struck Irina was the strange reluctance of the local residents to talk about the Sokolov family. When she mentioned her research, people would look away, change the subject, or simply walk away. This only fueled her curiosity. What could have happened to this family that, after more than 100 years, people were still afraid to utter their name? On the day that Irina first approached the estate, the sky was overcast with heavy gray clouds. The mansion, built in the neoclassical style, towered over the surrounding forest like a silent guardian of long-forgotten secrets. Peeling paint, broken windows, a partially collapsed roof. Everything spoke of decades of oblivion. But even in its dilapidated state, the building exuded an ominous beauty. Irina took some photos and walked around the perimeter of the mansion, trying to find a safe entrance. What she discovered in the backyard made her heart clench. Among the tall grass were tombstones, a small family cemetery. Most of the graves were so old that the inscriptions on the stones had been erased by time and bad weather, but one tombstone caught her attention. Unlike the others, it was made of black marble, and the inscription on it could still be deciphered. Anastasia Sokolova, 1864 to 1881. May her soul be cleansed. A strange epitaph. Usually, on tombstones of that time, they wrote about eternal peace or the kingdom of heaven. Why did the soul of this young woman, who died at the age of 17, need cleansing? Irina photographed the tombstone and decided to return the next day with better equipment to try to get inside the mansion. In the evening, returning to Maria Petrovna's house, Irina cautiously started a conversation about the Sokolov family. The old woman, who had been friendly and talkative until then, suddenly became withdrawn. Her hands began to tremble. "It's not worth disturbing the past, dear," she said quietly. "Some stories are better left buried with their participants." But after a few glasses of tea with raspberry jam, Maria Petrovna softened a little. "My grandmother worked as a maid in that house," she said finally. She rarely talked about that time, but sometimes, especially when she had been drinking, she would tell strange things. About how the girls changed after their mother's death, about the strange sounds coming from locked rooms, about how Grigory Sokolov, the owner of the house, changed, became a different person. Maria Petrovna fell silent, staring out the window where twilight was gathering. Grandmother said that evil lived in that house, not the evil that comes from the outside, but the one that is born within us when we allow our darkest desires to take over. She turned to Irina. Her eyes were full of concern. "Be careful in that house, girl. Some places retain the imprint of the events that happened in them." The next morning, Irina went to the local archive. The archive building, small and inconspicuous, was located on the outskirts of the village. Inside, it smelled of dust and old paper. An elderly woman with a stern face and gray hair pulled back in a tight bun sat at the table. She introduced herself as Valentina Sergeyevna, the head of the archive. When Irina explained the purpose of her visit, Valentina Sergeyevna frowned. "We have little information about the Sokolovs," she said dryly. "Most of the documents were lost during a fire in 1957. But after some persuasion and mentioning the official nature of the research, The archivist reluctantly led Irina to a small room in the back of the building. "Here's everything we have." Valentina Sergeyevna pointed to a dusty box standing on the top shelf. "But I must warn you, what you are looking for may not be what you want to find." Left alone, Irina opened the box. Inside lay documents yellowed with age, several photographs, newspaper clippings, official papers. The first thing that caught her attention was a family photograph of the Sokolovs, dated 1878. It showed a stately man with a thick beard and an imperious gaze, obviously Grigory Sokolov. Next to him stood three young girls strikingly similar to each other, all with long dark hair, pale skin, and identical black dresses. Their faces were strangely lifeless, their eyes empty, as if looking into nowhere. Under the photograph was the caption, "Grigory Sokolov with his daughters Anastasia, Elizaveta, and Maria." Irina compared the date of the photograph with the date on Anastasia's tombstone. She must have been about 14 years old here, and she died 3 years after this picture was taken. The next document she pulled from the box was a newspaper clipping from the Arkhangelsk Provincial Gazette dated June 12, 1881. The headline read, "Tragedy in the Sokolov industrialist family." The article reported the sudden death of Grigory Sokolov's youngest daughter, Anastasia, from a nervous fever. The note mentioned that the girl had suffered for several months from an unknown illness accompanied by severe pain and periods of unconsciousness. But what really interested Irina was a short note at the end of the article. It is noteworthy that the death of the young Sokolov heiress followed shortly after the mysterious disappearance of the local midwife, Agafya Karpova, who, according to neighbors, was a frequent guest in the industrialist's house in recent months. What was a midwife doing in a house where the youngest girl was 14 years old and there was no mother alive? Irina continued to study the documents and came across another newspaper clipping dated October of the same year. It reported the suicide of Sokolov's middle daughter, Elizaveta, who, according to the servants, jumped out of the window of the top floor in a fit of madness. Irina felt a chill run down her spine. 2 deaths in one family within a few months. This could not be a coincidence. She continued to sort through the documents and discovered a personal diary which, judging by the inscription on the first page, belonged to Maria, the eldest of the Sokolov sisters. The diary was a small book in a leather binding with pages yellowed with age. Many of the entries were blurred or faded so much that they could not be read, but some fragments still remained legible. The first readable entry was dated March 1879. "Father came to Nastia again at night. Her room is next to mine, and I hear everything. Her crying breaks my heart, but I can't do anything. If I intervene, he will come to me as before. Lord, forgive me for my cowardice." Irina felt her stomach clench with horror. What she was reading was too terrible to believe, but the following entries only confirmed her worst suspicions. June 1879. Liza said she can't take it anymore. She wants to run away, but where can we go? Who will believe us, the daughters of the respected Grigory Sokolov? Who will believe that under the mask of a noble industrialist and philanthropist hides a monster who has turned his own daughters into his concubines? September 1880. Nastia is pregnant. Father is furious. He has locked her in a room on the 3rd floor and doesn't let anyone near her except old Agafya. I hear Nastia's cries at night. She calls for her mother, but mother will not come. No one will come. With trembling hands, Irina turned the page. The next entry was dated May 1881. Today Nastia gave birth. The child is dead, thank God. Agafya said it was a boy, ugly and blue. Nastia is bleeding, and Agafya says she won't survive the night. Father has locked himself in his study with a bottle of vodka. He is shouting and crying. I have never seen him like this. Irina closed the diary, feeling nauseous. The story she was uncovering was so terrible that her mind refused to fully accept it. Could the respected industrialist Grigory Sokolov really have turned his daughters into sexual slaves? And what happened to the midwife Agafya Karpova after Anastasia's death? The next document she found was a letter written by Grigory Sokolov himself and addressed to the local bailiff. The letter was dated July 1881, shortly after Anastasia's death. Dear Nikolai Petrovich, I am writing to you to express my deepest concern about the disappearance of Agafia Karpova. As you know, Mrs. Karpova provided medical services to my late daughter in the last months of her life. I fear that she may have been the victim of an accident on her way home on the night of Anastasia's death. I am ready to finance the search and offer a reward of 500 rubles for any information about her whereabouts. Seeking the midwife or trying to cover up the crime by bribing local authorities. Irina couldn't help but wonder about this. The next document was an official report on the suicide of Elizaveta Sokolova in October of the same year. According to the conclusion of the police doctor, the girl jumped out of the window of the third floor in a state of mental derangement caused by prolonged melancholy after the death of her sister. The report was signed by the same bailiff to whom Grigory Sokolov addressed his letter. Irina continued to study the documents and came across another newspaper clipping dated December 1881. The headline read, "Industrialist Sokolov announces engagement." The article reported that Grigory Sokolov, recently widowed after the tragic death of his wife and 2 younger daughters, had announced his engagement to Maria, his eldest daughter. The wedding was to take place in the spring of the following year. Irina stared at the article in disbelief. The engagement of a father to his daughter? How could this be printed in an official newspaper? How could society accept it? But in the next clipping, dated February 1882, the explanation became clear. Grigory Sokolov adopts orphan. The article reported that the industrialist had officially adopted an orphan, Maria Kuznetsova, who would now bear his last name. Mr. Sokolov's kind deed aroused approval in society, especially after the tragedy that befell his family. This was a lie. Maria was not an orphan. She was Sokolov's own daughter, but obviously he had found a way to circumvent the law and public opinion to legitimize his perverted relationship with his last remaining daughter. With trembling hands, Irina pulled the last document from the box. It was another entry from Maria's diary, dated the day of her wedding. "Today I became the wife of my father before God and people. I vowed to love him and obey him until the end of my days. The priest blessed our union, unaware of the sin that hides behind it. The guests drank to our happiness, and I only dreamed of death, which would free me from this nightmare. But I am not as strong as Liza, cannot jump. I can only wait and pray that God will forgive me for my sins and for my weakness." Irina closed the box, feeling nauseous. The story she had uncovered was so terrible that she wanted to believe that it was all a figment of the imagination, that the documents were fakes, but deep down she knew that it was all true, that behind the walls of the majestic Sokolov mansion, a tragedy had unfolded that the local residents preferred to forget, but which had left an indelible mark on the history of this place. Deciding to learn more, Irina went to the abandoned estate the next day. The sky was overcast and a fine rain was drizzling, turning the road into a muddy mess. The mansion, towering over the surrounding forest, seemed even more ominous in the cloudy weather. Finding a broken window on the first floor, Irina climbed inside. The air in the house was musty, smelling of dampness and decay. The floor was littered with broken furniture, shards of glass, and fallen plaster. But even in this state, the mansion retained traces of its former splendor. High ceilings with stucco moldings, remnants of expensive wallpaper on the walls, marble fireplaces. Irina cautiously moved through the rooms, trying not to step on the rotten floorboards. In one of the rooms, she found the remains of a large library, dilapidated bookcases, piles of books turned to dust from moisture and time. In another, the remains of a luxurious dining room with a huge oak table cracked with age. But what really caught her attention was on the third floor. Climbing the creaking staircase, Irina found herself in a corridor with doors to several rooms. One of the doors was locked not with an ordinary lock, but with a new padlock, which sharply contrasted with the dilapidated state of the rest of the house. This seemed strange. Who and why had locked this room in an abandoned house? Using a small crowbar, which she had thoughtfully brought with her, Irina broke the lock and opened the door. What she saw inside made her freeze in place. The room, unlike the rest of the house, was clean and well-kept. In the center stood a bed covered with clean white linen. Icons and framed photographs hung on the walls, and in the corner of the room, in a rocking chair, sat an elderly woman, staring at Irina with insane eyes. "You have come?" the old woman whispered in a hoarse voice. "He said you would come." Irina froze on the threshold, unable to move from shock and fear. The woman in the chair was dressed in an old-fashioned black dress. Her gray hair was pulled back in a tight bun at the back of her head. Her face, covered with wrinkles, seemed like a wax mask, and her eyes, dark and shiny, looked through Irina as if they saw something behind her. "Who are you?" Irina finally squeezed out, feeling her heart pounding in her chest. The old woman tilted her head, as if listening to something. "You are looking for the truth about the Sokolovs, aren't you?" she said, ignoring Irina's question. "You found the diaries, read the documents, but you still don't know the whole truth." Irina took a step forward, overcoming her fear. "How do you know what I'm looking for?" The old woman laughed a dry, creaking laugh that sounded more like a cough. "I know a lot. I know what happened in this house. I was here." Irina felt a chill run down her spine. You lived here? You knew the Sokolov family?" "Knew." The old woman laughed again. "I am the Sokolov family. I am Maria." Irina stepped back, not believing her ears. "That's impossible. Maria Sokolova lived in the 19th century. She must be over 160 years old. 163 to be exact." The old woman nodded. "A long life. Too long. Filled with suffering and guilt." Irina didn't know what to think. Obviously, the old woman was out of her mind. Perhaps she was a homeless person who had found refuge in the abandoned house or was suffering from dementia. But something in her eyes, in the confidence of her voice, made Irina doubt. "What if you really are Maria Sokolova?" Irina said cautiously, deciding to play along with the old woman. "Then can you tell me what really happened to your sisters? To Anastasia and Elizaveta?" The old woman's eyes filled with tears. "My sisters," she whispered. "My poor sisters, they were purer than me, stronger than me. They fought him, and I gave up." Irina slowly approached the chair and knelt down next to the old woman. "Tell me," she asked softly. "Tell me everything." And the old woman began her story. Her voice was quiet but clear, as if she had been waiting for this moment for many years. "It all started after Mother's death. She died when I was 16, Liza was 14, and Nastia was 12. Father changed after her death. He had always been strict but fair, but without Mother, without her influence, he became a different person." The old woman fell silent, staring into the void in front of her. "At first, he came to me at night, drunk and crying. He said that I looked so much like Mother, that he was lonely, that he needed comfort." Her voice trembled. "I resisted at first, but he was stronger, and I was just a child who was afraid of her father." Irina listened, feeling nauseous. "And then what?" she asked quietly. "Then he started coming to Liza," the old woman continued. "She was more beautiful than all of us, like an angel from the pictures in the church, fair-haired with blue eyes. She resisted longer than I did, but she broke in the end." The old woman turned to Irina. Her eyes were full of tears. "And then it was Nastia's turn, our youngest sister, our baby. Liza and I tried to protect her, locked her room at night, but Father, he was the master of the house. He had the keys to all the doors." Irina felt tears streaming down her cheeks. The story the old woman was telling was too terrible to be true, but something in her voice, in her eyes, said that she was not lying. "What happened to Anastasia?" Irina asked, although she already knew the answer from the diary. "She became pregnant," the old woman replied. Her voice was barely audible. "At 14, by her own father. When he found out, he was furious. He locked her on the 3rd floor in this very room and didn't let anyone near her except the midwife Agafya." The old woman pointed to the wall behind Irina. Turning around, Irina saw an old framed photograph. It showed a young girl with long dark hair and sad eyes. "This is Nastia," said the old woman. The photograph was taken a few months before her death. Irina stood up and walked over to the photograph. The girl's face in the picture was pale and emaciated, her eyes empty, as if she already knew her fate. Irina gently ran her fingers over the glass of the frame, feeling a strange connection with this girl who had died almost a century and a half ago. The birth was difficult, the old woman continued. Her voice trembled with suppressed emotions. The child was born dead, deformed. Agafya said it was a boy. He had an incorrect head shape, too large, and other deformities that happen when close relatives, when a father and daughter. The old woman fell silent, unable to continue. Her hands, covered with age spots, convulsively squeezed the armrests of the chair. Nastya died the next day from bleeding and fever. Agafya could not help her. No one could. And what happened to the midwife? Irina asked, recalling the mention of Agafya Karpova's disappearance in the newspaper article. The old woman's eyes darkened. Fear flashed in them. Father killed her, she whispered. That same night when Nastya died. He was afraid that she would tell about what she had seen, about the child, about what was really happening in our house. Irina felt a shiver run down her body. Did you see it? The old woman shook her head. No, but I heard their conversation before Nastya's death. Father offered Agafya money for silence, a lot of money, but she was a pious woman. She said that she could not remain silent about such a sin, that she had to tell the priest, if not the authorities. The old woman paused. That night, after Nastya's death, I heard screams from Agafya's room, and then silence. The next morning, Father said that she had left, but I knew it was a lie. And the body? Irina asked, feeling her professional interest as a historian fighting with the horror of what she had heard. The well, the old woman replied simply. The old well behind the house in the forest. It had not been used for a long time, was almost dry, the perfect place to hide a body. Irina remembered seeing the remains of an old well in the forest near the mansion. A brick structure almost completely destroyed by time, overgrown with moss and ivy. Could the remains of the midwife still be there, in the dark depths, after more than a century? And Elizaveta? Irina asked, returning to the chair. The documents say that she jumped out of the window. Yes, the old woman nodded. Liza couldn't take it anymore. After Nastya's death, she changed, stopped eating, stopped talking, just sat by the window for hours, looking at the sky. And then, one night, when Father came to her, she preferred death to his touch. Tears flowed down the old woman's wrinkled cheeks. I heard her scream. I was in the next room. I heard the glass break, how Father screamed. I ran out into the corridor and saw him standing by the open window with his bare torso, in unbuttoned trousers. He was looking down at the courtyard where Liza's body lay. Irina reached out and gently touched the old woman's hand. And you, what happened to you after that? The old woman smiled bitterly. I became the wife of my father, officially an adopted daughter, whom he nobly took under his wing after the death of her parents. But in reality, the last of his daughters turned into his concubine. But how could this happen? Irina exclaimed. How could society accept it? How could a priest bless such a union? Money, my child, the old woman replied wearily. My father was the richest man in the province. He donated huge sums to the church, to hospitals, to orphanages. He bribed officials and the police. Everyone knew what was happening behind the closed doors of our house, but no one dared to talk about it out loud. Irina looked at the old woman, trying to make sense of what she had heard. If this was really Maria Sokolova, then how could she have lived to such an age? It was impossible. It had to be that the old woman was crazy, imagining herself as the heroine of this terrible story. You don't believe me, said the old woman, as if reading her thoughts. You think I'm a crazy old woman who made up this whole story. She smiled a strange, knowing smile. I don't blame you. I myself didn't believe it at first. Didn't believe that such a thing was possible. That what was possible? Irina asked, feeling her heart begin to beat faster. The old woman leaned forward, and her voice became a whisper. Immortality or a curse? Depends on how you look at it. Irina recoiled. Now she was sure that the old woman was out of her mind. Immortality? She repeated incredulously. Yes, The old woman nodded. The price for my sins, for my silence when my sisters suffered, for my weakness when I should have been strong. She pointed to the icons hanging on the walls. I have prayed for death every day since my father died. But death does not come. I have grown old, but I do not die, as if time itself refuses to accept me. Irina didn't know what to say. The story was becoming more and more strange and implausible, and yet something in the old woman's eyes, in the confidence of her voice, made Irina listen further. What happened after your wedding with your father? She asked cautiously. We lived together for 10 years. The old woman replied. 10 years of hell. We had 3 children. All of them were born with physical and mental problems. The first died in infancy. The second lived to be 5 years old but never learned to talk or walk. The third was the worst. He was born almost normal. But with age, something wrong, something evil, began to manifest in him. The old woman fell silent. Her gaze became absent, as if she were looking into the past. When he was 7, he killed a neighbor's dog, just for fun. At 10, he tried to set fire to the house with our maid inside. She paused. Her hands began to tremble. At 13, he tried to rape a girl from the village. My husband caught him and locked him in the basement. But at night the boy got out and killed him, slit his throat with a razor while he slept. Irina listened, holding her breath. The story was becoming more and more macabre and unbelievable, and yet she couldn't stop listening. What happened to your son? She asked quietly. I poisoned him, the old woman replied simply, without emotion. I mixed arsenic into his food. I knew that he was a product of sin, that evil lived in him. I had to stop him before he harmed other children. Irina was silent, shocked by the confession of a murder committed more than a century ago. The old woman continued. Her voice was even, as if she were talking about something mundane. After the death of my father and son, I was left alone in this house, a rich widow with a bad reputation. People whispered behind my back but smiled in my face. Because of the money, I tried to atone for the sins of my family, donated to churches and orphanages, built a hospital in the city, but nothing could wash the blood off my hands. The blood of my sisters, the blood of the midwife, the blood of my children. The old woman raised her hands, looking at her gnarled, arthritic fingers. It was as if she actually saw blood on them. And then the revolution started. The Bolsheviks came for me too. I was arrested as a representative of the exploiting class. They wanted to shoot me. They didn't even know how grateful I would have been for the bullet. She chuckled bitterly, but I escaped. And since then I've been hiding, changing names, changing residences, but always returning here, to this house, as if something is pulling me back, as if the souls of my sisters won't let me go. Irina listened, not knowing whether to believe the old woman. The story was too fantastical, too horrible to be true. And yet, the documents she had found in the archive confirmed at least part of the story. Why are you telling me all this? Irina asked finally. The old woman looked at her with a strange mixture of hope and despair in her eyes. Because you can free me, she said quietly. You can end this curse. Irina stepped back, feeling a sudden fear. Find their remains, the old woman replied. Find the bodies of my sisters and the midwife. Give them a proper burial. Tell their story to the world. Only then will I finally be able to die. Irina looked at the old woman, not knowing what to say. Part of her wanted to run away from this house and never return, but another part, the historian, the researcher, was intrigued. If at least part of the old woman's story was true, it could be an important historical discovery. I'll try, she said finally. I'll look for evidence. If your story is true, I'll tell it to the world. The gratitude in the old woman's eyes was almost palpable. Thank you, she whispered. Thank you, my child. As Irina was leaving the room, the old woman called out to her. Be careful. Evil still lives in this house. It's not just in the walls or in the memory. It's in the blood, in our blood. With these words, the old woman closed her eyes, as if falling asleep. Irina quietly closed the door behind her and hurried down the stairs, wanting to leave this house as soon as possible. Returning to Maria Petrovna's house, Irina couldn't stop thinking about the strange encounter with the old woman. Was she really Maria Sokolova, somehow having lived to the 21st century? Or just a crazy woman who had somehow learned the story of the Sokolov family and imagined herself to be a part of it? Irina decided to check the old woman's words. The next day, she returned to the archive and asked Valentina Sergeyevna to show her all the documents concerning the Sokolov family after 1882, the year of the supposed wedding of Grigory Sokolov and his eldest daughter. After some searching, the archivist retrieved another box of documents. Among them, Irina found birth certificates for 3 children of Grigory and Maria Sokolov: Alexei, 1883, Ivan, 1885, and Nikolai, 1880. The medical records attached to the birth certificates mentioned congenital anomalies in all 3 children, although specific diagnoses were not indicated. Irina also found death certificates for the 2 older sons. Alexei died at the age of 1 from natural causes, and Ivan at the age of 5 from complications of a congenital disease. The death certificate for the youngest son, Nikolai, was not in the archive. Next, she discovered the death certificate of Grigory Sokolov, dated July 1901. The cause of death was listed as hemorrhage as a result of a sharp object wound. Attached to the certificate was a police report stating that the industrialist was found dead in his bed with his throat cut. Suspicion fell on a servant who disappeared on the night of the murder, but he was never found. But the most interesting document turned out to be a newspaper clipping from the Arkhangelsk Provincial Gazette from October of the same year. It reported the strange disappearance of Maria Sokolova and her 13-year-old son, Nikolai. According to the article, the widow and son of the murdered industrialist disappeared from their home several months after his death, leaving all their property behind. Searches organized by the police yielded no results. The article ended with the suggestion that the widow and son may have been victims of the same killer as Grigory Sokolov. But if the old woman was to be believed, the son did not disappear, but was poisoned by his own mother, and Maria Sokolova herself was still alive and in the abandoned estate. Irina understood that it sounded absurd, and yet the documents confirmed part of the old woman's story, details that would be difficult for a random person to know. Perhaps the old woman was a historian like herself, or a relative of the Sokolovs who had heard family legends. Deciding to check another detail of the old woman's story, Irina went in search of the old well where, according to her, the body of the midwife Agafia Karpova was hidden. She vaguely remembered seeing the remains of a well in the forest not far from the mansion. After several hours of searching, Irina finally found what she was looking for: a dilapidated brick structure, almost completely hidden by bushes and young trees. The well had been abandoned for many decades. Its upper part had partially collapsed, and the opening was littered with stones and debris. Using the flashlight on her phone, Irina illuminated the bottom of the well. Because of the trash and debris, it was difficult to make out anything, but at a depth of several meters she noticed something white that could have been a bone. Irina's heart began to beat faster. Could there really be human remains in the well, the remains of a midwife killed by Grigory Sokolov to conceal his crimes? Irina realized that she could not explore the well on her own. If there really were human remains there, it was a matter for the police and forensic scientists. She took several photos of the well and marked its location on the map in her phone. Returning to the village, Irina decided to visit the old woman in the abandoned mansion once again. She had more questions and hoped to get more concrete evidence of the old woman's identity. But when she returned to the mansion and went up to the 3rd floor, she was in for a surprise. The door to the old woman's room was open, but the room itself was empty. The rocking chair was in its place, but there was no one in it. The bed was made, but there were no traces of anyone having recently lain or sat on it. Irina searched the room, but found no personal belongings of the old woman. No clothes, no documents, nothing that could confirm her identity. The only things that remained were the photographs on the walls, photographs of the Sokolov family that looked too old and fragile to be recent reproductions. Irina was puzzled. Where could the elderly woman, who could barely move, have gone? How could she have left the room without leaving any traces of her presence? Returning to Maria Petrovna's house, Irina couldn't stop thinking about the old woman and her strange disappearance. She decided to ask her landlady if she had seen an elderly woman leaving the abandoned mansion. To her surprise, Maria Petrovna reacted strangely to the question. Her face turned pale and her hands began to shake. "You saw her?" she asked in a whisper. "You saw the old woman from the mansion?" Irina nodded, puzzled by the landlady's reaction. "Yes, I met an elderly woman in one of the rooms on the third floor. She said her name was Maria Sokolova." Maria Petrovna crossed herself. "Lord have mercy," she whispered. "You talked to a ghost, girl." "A ghost?" Irina looked at the landlady incredulously. "What do you mean?" "People in the village have been seeing her for many years," Maria Petrovna replied. "An old woman in black who appears in the windows of the mansion, especially often in the windows of the third floor. My grandmother said that it is the spirit of Maria Sokolova, who cannot find peace because of the sins committed in that house." Irina shook her head. "But I talked to her. She was real. I could touch her." Maria Petrovna shrugged. "I'm just conveying what people say. No one living in the village has ever seen the old woman up close. No one has talked to her. Only sometimes her silhouette flickers in the windows of the mansion, as if she is still waiting for someone or something." Irina was confused. She was sure that she had talked to a living person, not a ghost. The old woman was real, tangible, and yet her sudden disappearance and the lack of any personal belongings in the room were strange. "There's something else," Maria Petrovna added after a pause. "Legend has it that if you talk to the old woman from the mansion, she will take a part of your life to prolong her cursed existence." Irina laughed, although the laughter came out nervously. "You don't believe in these superstitions, do you?" Maria Petrovna did not smile in response. "I only know that none of those who claimed to have seen the old woman lived a long life. They all died young from illnesses or accidents." That night, Irina couldn't fall asleep for a long time. Her thoughts were occupied by the story of the Sokolov family and the mysterious old woman who, according to local residents, was a ghost. She knew that she should not believe in such superstitions, and yet, something in the old woman's eyes, in her words about immortality and the curse, made Irina doubt. The next day, she decided to contact the police with information about possible human remains in the old well. The police officer who took the statement looked skeptical, but promised to send a team to check it out. 2 days later, a group of forensic scientists arrived in the village. They examined the well and indeed discovered human remains. According to preliminary estimates, they belonged to a woman and had been there for more than 100 years. The news of the find quickly spread throughout the village and attracted the attention of regional media. Journalists contacted Irina, and she told them the story of the Sokolov family, based on the documents she had found in the archive. She did not mention the meeting with the old woman, fearing that it would undermine her reputation as a serious researcher. Interest in the story grew, and soon a decision was made to conduct full-scale archaeological excavations on the territory of the Sokolov estate, including the family cemetery. Irina was invited as a historical consultant. Excavations began in late summer. Archaeologists explored the family cemetery and discovered remains that presumably belonged to Anastasia and Elizaveta Sokolov. DNA analysis confirmed that the remains in the well belonged to a woman who was not related to the Sokolovs, probably the midwife Agafia Karpova. But the most surprising discovery was made when archaeologists opened the grave supposedly belonging to Grigory Sokolov. The coffin was empty. There were no human remains in it, only stones creating weight. This discovery raised new questions. If the body of Grigory Sokolov was not buried in the family cemetery, then where was it and why was a fake funeral arranged? In search of answers, archaeologists expanded the excavation zone and discovered a hiding place under the house. It contained human remains which, judging by the clothes and personal belongings, belonged to a man, presumably Grigory Sokolov, and a teenage boy, possibly his youngest son, Nikolai. Analysis of the remains showed that the man died from a cut throat, and the boy from arsenic poisoning. This fully corresponded to the old woman's story. The story of the Sokolov family became a sensation. Articles about the Russian Frankenstein family, as they were dubbed by journalists, appeared in national and even international publications. Irina gave several interviews talking about her research and the findings of the archaeologists, but she still did not mention the meeting with the old woman. This part of the story seemed too strange, too incredible to be included in a scientific study. Several months later, after the completion of the excavations, Irina returned to Kamenka to collect additional material for her dissertation. The village had changed. Tourists had appeared, coming to see the cursed Sokolov estate. Local residents, who had previously avoided talking about the industrialist's family, were now happy to tell legends and tales, often embellishing them for impressionable listeners. Irina rented the same room in Maria Petrovna's house. The landlady greeted her warmly, but with a note of concern in her voice. "You look pale, girl," she said, looking at Irina attentively. "Are you feeling well?" Irina assured the landlady that she was just tired from the road, but deep down she knew that it was not just that. For the past several months, she had been feeling strange fatigue, as if something was sucking the life out of her. Doctors, whom she had consulted in Moscow, had not found any diseases, but advised her to rest more and avoid stress. On the very first evening of her return, Irina decided to visit the Sokolov mansion. Despite the fact that the archaeological work had been completed and the territory of the estate had been partially cleared and prepared for conversion into a museum, the building itself still remained abandoned and ominous. It was November, the days had become short, and by the time Irina approached the mansion, it was already getting dark. The gloomy silhouette of the building stood out against the gray sky, and Irina felt a strange desire to turn back. But her professional curiosity turned out to be stronger than fear. She entered the mansion through the main entrance, which had now been partially renovated and strengthened for the safety of visitors. Inside it was quiet and cool. Irina turned on the flashlight on her phone and headed to the staircase leading to the third floor. The room where she had met the old woman now looked different. Archaeologists had cleaned it of debris and dust, and restorers had begun work on restoring the stucco on the ceiling. The rocking chair was gone, as were the photographs on the walls. The room was empty and impersonal, as if it had never been inhabited. Irina slowly walked around the room, illuminating every corner with a flashlight. No trace of the old woman's presence, no personal belongings, nothing that could confirm that their meeting had actually taken place. And yet, standing in the center of the room, Irina felt a strange presence, as if someone was watching her, as if the walls of the house kept the memory of the events that had taken place here more than a century ago. "I fulfilled my promise," Irina said into the emptiness. "I found their remains. I told their story to the world. Now you can rest in peace." No answer, only silence and the rustle of wind outside the window. Irina felt silly talking to an empty room, and yet, as she turned to leave, she thought she saw movement in the corner, a shadow that flickered and disappeared into the darkness. Irina hurried to leave the mansion, feeling a strange relief when she was out in the fresh air. She was a rational person, a scientist, and did not believe in ghosts or curses. And yet, Maria Petrovna's words about the old woman taking part of the lives of those who talked to her did not leave her head. In the following days, Irina continued her research, interviewing local residents and collecting additional materials for her dissertation. She learned even more details about the life of the Sokolov family, about Grigory Sokolov's charity work, about his reputation as a devout and pious man, about the strange behavior of his daughters after the death of their mother. But what especially interested Irina were the stories about Maria Sokolova after the death of her father, husband, and son. According to local legends, she did not disappear, as the official document stated, but continued to live in the mansion, which became a place of pilgrimage for women seeking healing from infertility or help in difficult childbirth. One elderly woman, whom Irina met in the local church, said that her grandmother had gone to the Sokolova witch in 1920, when she could not conceive a child after several years of marriage. "My grandmother said that the witch gave her some kind of potion and told her to drink it every day at dawn," the woman said. "And after 3 months, my grandmother became pregnant with my father." Another old-timer said that his grandfather had seen Maria Sokolova in 1935, a gray-haired old woman who was still living in the dilapidated mansion, despite attempts by local authorities to evict her. Grandfather said that she should have been a deep old woman, but she moved like a young woman, he said, and her eyes were young, bright, as if she drank the blood of babies to stay young. He added with a chuckle. Irina wrote down these stories, but treated them skeptically. Folk memory often preserves distorted versions of real events, embellished with superstitions and prejudices. And yet, something in these stories bothered her. She was especially interested in the legend of the Sokolova book, supposedly a diary or grimoire that Maria Sokolova had kept throughout her life and in which she described the secrets of longevity and magical rituals. According to local legends, the book was hidden somewhere in the mansion and brought misfortune to anyone who tried to find it. Irina decided to carefully inspect the mansion once again in search of this book. She obtained permission from the restorers and one day spent several hours inspecting every room, every nook and cranny of the abandoned house. And her searches were not in vain. In one of the rooms on the first floor, behind a loosened floorboard, she discovered a hiding place. In it lay an old book in a leather binding, exactly like the diary of Maria Sokolova that she had seen in the archive. With trembling hands, Irina opened the book. The first pages were written in the same handwriting as the diary from the archive and dated back to the beginning of the 20th century, the time after the supposed disappearance of Maria Sokolova. The entries were strange and disjointed. Maria wrote about her life after the death of her father, husband, and son, about how she hid from the authorities, changing names and residences, but always returning to her family nest. She wrote about strange changes in her body, about how slowly she aged, how quickly her wounds healed, how she could go without food and water longer than ordinary people. "I'm starting to believe that it's really a curse," she wrote in one of the entries dated 1910. "A curse for the sins of my father and for my own weakness. I cannot die without atoning for these sins. But how to atone for something so terrible?" In later entries, Maria described her attempts to help other women using the knowledge of herbs and folk medicine that she had received from the midwife Agafia before her death. She wrote about women who came to her with problems of infertility, with complications of pregnancy, with diseases that official medicine could not cure. "Maybe this is my atonement," she wrote, "to help those who cannot be helped by anyone else, to use my knowledge to alleviate the suffering of other women." But the strangest entries were dated in the middle of the 20th century. By that time, Maria's handwriting had changed. It had become more uneven, the trembling handwriting of an old woman. She wrote about her attempts to find a way to die, about overdoses of poison, about attempts to drown herself, about jumping from heights. Nothing brought the desired liberation. "I'm starting to think that the only way to end it is to find someone who will take my place," she wrote in an entry dated 1960. "Someone who will take on the burden of my curse, someone who will tell our story to the world and thereby free the souls of my sisters." The last entry was dated just a few months earlier, April 2022. "I feel that she will come soon, the one who will free me. I saw her in a dream, a young woman with intelligent eyes and a strong spirit. She will find the truth and tell our story to the world. And then, finally, I will be able to rest in peace." Irina closed the book, feeling a chill run down her spine. The last entry had been made a month before her arrival in Kamenka, as if Maria Sokolova knew that she would come. Suddenly, Irina heard footsteps behind her. Turning around, she saw the old woman, the same one she had talked to in the room on the third floor several months ago. She was standing in the doorway wearing the same black dress. Her gray hair was gathered in the same tight bun. "You found my book," the old woman said quietly. "Now you know the whole truth." Irina stood up, clutching the book to her chest. "Who are you really?" she asked, although deep inside she already knew the answer. "You know who I am," the old woman replied with a sad smile. "I am Maria Sokolova, daughter and wife of Grigory Sokolov, the last of the cursed line." "It's impossible," Irina whispered, although her confidence in the impossibility of what was happening was melting with each passing second. "I must be over 160 years old, 163 years, 7 months and 12 days. The old woman nodded. "Too long a life for a human, especially for someone who dreams of death every day." Irina looked at the old woman, not knowing what to say. Part of her still didn't believe what was happening, considered it some kind of complex deception or hallucination, but another part, the one that had read the diaries and seen the results of the excavations, was beginning to believe. "Why did you tell me all this?" she asked finally. "Why did you show me the diaries? Lead me to the remains of your sisters and the midwife? Because you are my way to liberation," the old woman replied. "You told our story to the world. You gave my sisters and Agathia a proper burial. You fulfilled what I have been praying for over a century." She took a step forward, reaching out her hand to Irina. "And now I can rest in peace." Irina instinctively stepped back. "What will happen to me?" The old woman's eyes were full of sadness. "I didn't want it to happen this way," she said quietly. "I didn't know that the curse would pass on to you. I thought I could just die when the truth came out." She paused. "But now I see that it is impossible. Someone must bear the burden. Someone must keep the memory of our family. And now it's you." Irina felt fear gripping her body. "What do you mean?" "You've already started to change," the old woman said, pointing at Irina. "You feel a fatigue that doesn't go away after rest. You see things that others don't see. You are beginning to understand secrets hidden from ordinary people." Irina remembered her strange symptoms of the past months. Constant fatigue, the pallor that Maria Petrovna had noticed, moments of strange clairvoyance when she knew things that she could not know. "It's impossible," she whispered, but her voice trembled. "In this world, much is possible," the old woman replied, "especially in places where the line between life and death is thinned by suffering and sin." She took another step forward. "Don't be afraid. It's not a curse, if you make it a blessing. Use your longevity to help others, to correct the mistakes of the past, to fight against injustice." Irina looked at the old woman, feeling a strange calm replacing fear. "And if I don't want this burden? Then find someone who will take it on," the old woman replied. "Someone who will tell your story to the world as you told mine." She smiled a strange, knowing smile. "But remember, the longer you live with this burden, the harder it is to get rid of it." With these words, the old woman began to slowly melt into the air. Her figure became more and more transparent, until it disappeared completely, leaving Irina alone in the empty room with the diary in her hands. 5 years have passed since Irina Vorontsova discovered the story of the Sokolov family. Her dissertation on the merchant dynasties of northern Russia became a bestseller. And the book, The Curse of the Sokolovs, a story of incest and death in the Russian hinterland, was translated into 12 languages. Irina herself became a well-known historian specializing in the dark pages of Russian history. She was beautiful, successful, and seemed ageless. At 35, she still looked 25. The Sokolov mansion was restored and turned into a museum, where visitors could learn about the tragic fate of the 3 sisters and their rapist father. The story of the Sokolov family became part of local folklore, attracting tourists from all over the country. But no one knew about the strange changes happening to Irina, about how slowly her wounds healed, about how she could go without food and water longer than ordinary people, about the strange dreams in which she saw Maria, Anastasia, and Elizaveta Sokolov as if she knew them in life. And no one knew about the diary that she continued to keep, writing down her observations and thoughts, as Maria Sokolova had done before her, in a diary that began with the words, "My name is Irina Vorontsova, and I am cursed. Cursed to know the truth about the Sokolov family. Cursed to bear the burden of their sins. Cursed to live when all I want is to rest in peace." Every year, on the day of her arrival in Kamenka, Irina returned to the Sokolov mansion. She went up to the 3rd floor to the room where she had once met the old woman, and looked out the window at the family cemetery where now rested the remains of Anastasia and Elizaveta Sokolov, as well as the midwife Agathia Karpova. And every time she hoped to see among the tombstones a new one with the name of Maria Sokolova. But it was never there, as if Maria never died, as if she continued to live in Irina, in her dreams, in her memories that could not belong to her. This time, standing by the window, Irina noticed a young woman walking along the path towards the mansion. A student, judging by the backpack and notebook in her hands, possibly a budding historian. Just like Irina once did, possibly seeking material for her dissertation, Irina smiled, watching the approaching girl. Perhaps this was a sign. Perhaps it was time to pass on the burden, to tell her story to someone else, to find the liberation that Maria Sokolova had found. She took Maria's diary and her own from her bag and placed them on the windowsill. Then, she sat in an armchair in the corner of the room and began to wait for the door to open and the young woman to enter, seeking the truth about the Sokolov family, a truth that was too terrible to believe and too tempting to ignore. The door slowly opened, and a girl appeared on the threshold. She was young, with intelligent eyes and a determined expression, just like Irina had been 5 years ago. "Hello," the girl said, seeing Irina. "I'm sorry for the intrusion. I am Ekaterina, a history student. I am writing a paper about the Sokolov family and would like to ask you some questions." Irina smiled. History was repeating itself. The circle was closing. "Of course," she replied. "Sit down. I have a story for you. A story you won't find in any book or museum exhibit. A story about 3 sisters and their father. A story about sin, damnation, and redemption." The girl sat opposite Irina, took out a recorder, and started recording. "I'm listening," she said, unaware that this meeting would change her life forever. And Irina began her story just as Maria Sokolova had once begun her story for her. It all started after the death of their mother. The circle was complete. The story continued. The curse lived on.